Earlier this month, we reported on how media freedom in Tunisia has given birth to a host of new news outlets, but has polarized political debate there. This week, we're going to look at another consequence of the unshackling of the Tunisian news media, the coverage of the national security story, and how disproportionate it has become. Under the regime of President Ben Ali, journalists were told how, what, and when to report on national security issues, if at all. But buy a newspaper today or switch on the television, and you will find that national security stories headlined terrorism frequently top the news agenda. The question is, does the story merit the amount of coverage it's getting? And are Tunisians really in the kind of danger that their media suggest, or are news outlets just chasing eyeballs, trying to sell papers, drive up ratings? Is the story overhyped? The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now from Tunis on the flip side of media freedom in the birthplace of the Arab Spring.
Mount Chambi, July 29, 2013. A military patrol is ambushed. 8 soldiers are killed. That night, the story airs on the public broadcaster. Graphic footage is broadcast into homes across the country. A legitimate news story, but the way that it was covered shocked many Tunisians.
When the
channel showed the horrific images of dead and grieving soldiers, it was not professional, and we had discussions within the Journalists' Union about how to avoid supporting the terrorists' agenda by broadcasting graphic material.
I don't think that pictures of this kind could ever not create a climate of fear. There has been some improvement in the coverage of similar stories now, but unmonitored reporting in order to deliver news fast has inadvertently led to the broadcast of unacceptable images that show no respect toward people's dignity.
There is an issue when there is terrorism, war, death of man. When there are significant events like these, there is a race to win ratings, to win the scoop. Everyone needs to show professionalism when handling this topic, from security agents on one part to journalists on the other. But the threat is there.
Le danger est là.
However, even when there isn't breaking news to report, terrorism coverage finds its way onto the news agenda, from tenuous allegations made on the airwaves. To debate shows where guests frequently hype the threat level. To so-called entertainment shows where unwitting participants are subjected to prank kidnappings. A departure from the coverage that Tunisians were used to under former President Zine Abidine Ben Ali. Less than 4 years ago, terrorism was an editorial red line for Tunisia's media, and on the very rare occasions that journalists did report those stories, they either echoed the state line or risked being thrown in jail. Today, those restrictions have largely fallen away, but the pendulum has swung to the other extreme, and the media and their fixation on terrorism are being blamed for creating a climate of fear, which doesn't only emanate from the airwaves. Flip through Tunisian newspapers and you will find similar stories.
Here, for example, we can see a number of excesses. The headline says that they are terrorists who are arrested by the Ministry of the Interior. They are already referred to as terrorists with their faces shown, when there still hasn't been a court ruling against them. It's merely the ministry's claims. Here we can see very shocking and disturbing pictures of the bodies of terrorism suspects during a confrontation with the police. And of course the headline mentions a terrorist plot, using rather militaristic language. Security agents demolish terrorists. And here we can see a sensational front page with anti-terrorist brigades in their camouflage outfits, and the headline says, "Are we ready to pay the price of victory?" which sounds more like a propaganda headline than a journalistic one.
We can't forget that reporting about terrorism involves talking about internal groups like Ansar al-Sharia, the followers of Sharia law, which were active at the beginning of the new government's rule, propagating its ideology. It was this group that started a death list of journalists. Members of Ansar al-Sharia used to come and write on the walls of media houses that journalists who oppose Sharia will die. This created a psychological conflict between journalism and terrorism, and we could sense an absence of objectivity.
Je ne pense pas qu'on est en train de
I don't think we are giving it too much importance, or more than we should. We need to talk about it. It's better to be scared and prepared to fight against terrorism than sit here and wait. What Tunisian channels are doing would be done anywhere in the world.
partout dans le monde.
That argument is debatable, but what is clear is that terrorism is being covered by more news outlets in Tunisia than ever before. There are now 17 television channels broadcasting in the country, opposed to 5 under the old regime. There is also an array of new print and online outlets. Tunisia's media are now in a fiercely competitive market, and terrorism coverage sells. But that may not be the entire story. Before stepping down in January this year, Tunisia was governed by a coalition called Troika, led by the Nakhta party. Nakhta, which calls itself a moderate Islamic group, was banned under Ben Ali. During those years, it was accused of a number of violent attacks against the state, a history that opposition channels frequently use against it.
There is an ideology behind some media outlets. It consists of systematically linking, without much evidence, the Islamists in power and terrorist acts.
حالة من الفوضى وهذه الحالة من الفوضى ربما تخرج إذن حركة النهضة.
When Ennahda was clandestine, it did resort to violent acts that we could qualify as terrorism. But we were in a context of oppression, of dictatorship. Ennahda hasn't offered many mea culpas on this phase of its history, and as a consequence today, many link the terrorist phenomenon to the arrival of the Islamists to power.
Coverage that has reproduced political polarizations and debates on this issue has generated a misunderstanding among citizens about what is happening in the country. This kind of confusion naturally results in fear and doubts on whether there really is terrorism. Is it really true, or is it just part of an agenda? This topic is very complex. It cannot be covered with ease. But I can say that yes, the media coverage has generated a lot of fear. I can feel it in my own family.
Before anyone had heard of the term Arab Spring, Tunisians were calling their revolution the death of fear. That has proved premature. Fear is back, but in a different guise. And the institution that the revolutionaries fought to free, the media, they are the ones selling it.
More voices on the download now on the state of the news media in Tunisia.
Virtually the only public information that we have about alleged terrorists comes directly from these various security forces. They don't allow journalists to go into areas where these alleged terrorists allegedly operate. They say they coordinate with the courts and the Prime Ministry, but we don't really have evidence for this. Instead, we see press announcements from the security forces recycled through major media outlets, announcing quite emotionally the fight between security forces and terrorists. Not suspects, not alleged terrorists, but terrorists. Now, if terrorism is a crime, then it requires a due legal process. But it's difficult to see how this issue is being treated in the Tunisian media as anything other than a rallying cry in support of the security forces and their favored politicians.